Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, Owen Marcus. So Owen has been working with men and men's group for 25 years. He's also got a really strong background in embodiment, Rolfing, Hakomi, somatic experiencing, and he's the co-founder of something called the Everyman Project. So he'll tell us what that is. It's come recommended from Stephen Kotev, who's a friend of mine who's also on the podcast. Owen, welcome.
Thank you, Mark.
What was the beginning of your journey with the body? How did you get interested in embodiment?
I got interested in it because I really needed it. I was exceedingly disconnected, and I didn't know how disconnected I was until I got into it. And I got into it because I was living with a group of guys in Boulder, Colorado, back in the mid-'70s. One of my roommates was an attorney. He had given up his law practice of 8 years to become a Rolfer, which is a kind of, particular kind of body work that deals with structural integration. And he argued his case so well that I said, all right, I'll try it. And I tried it and spent 4 years living in Boulder, learning Rolfing and then studying with some people that ended up being really masters or leaders in that whole field. And my body and my emotions completely changed. I went from what ended up, I realizing later in my life, having dyslexia, dyspraxia, and Lyme disease. It really made me disconnected from my body. So those 4 years in Boulder brought me back into my body and then really saw what the potential of working with bodies really had for people and now for men.
So it sounds like you're in a good place at a good time. I mean, Ron Kurtz and Pete Levine and, Boulder, it sounds like a great place to be studying these things at that time.
It was. I mean, it wasn't intentional. I just happened to be there. And then to become a Rolfer, I had to go to massage school for a year, and Boulder had the leading massage school, maybe it still does. And out of that, I met these other people, and I was in Ron Kurtz's first professional training. And I remember seeing this guy, and he just stood up, this one person, this woman, asked her 3 questions, and immediately she was sobbing. And I said, how the hell did he do that? I mean, it just blew me away. That asking a question that was connected to the body would open up someone's emotions so much.
And I think Ron was famous for having this sort of ability to read bodies as well, as is what I hear.
He did, and he created this whole manual, which he published but never really went anyplace, and you can't get it now, where he took all the body types that started out with Reich, then Lowen, then Porges, and really refined it. And it's a several-page chart where it just delineates all the body types and the psychological significance of those types and how to work with them.
Yeah, the ones normally with the insulting names, aren't they? Like narcissistic, psychopathic. I wish someone would rename them. No one wants to be any of them. Okay, so tell us also a little bit about finding out your own dyspraxia. This is something a cousin of mine has some awareness of. And some of these other things that had you a little bit disconnected. I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey in that, because I think we haven't had anyone else on the show who's come from that kind of background.
Dyspraxia is what I call sort of dyslexia of the body. It's when you're so disconnected from your body, you don't even know where it is, and to move it in any coordinated way is pretty impossible. And growing up, I had that, but it was in graduate school when I was taking a speed reading course, and the guy said, I know you're doing the homework and you're trying, but you just can't seem to do it. Are you dyslexic? And I said, I don't think I am. He said, can you do a cross crawl? I said, what's a cross crawl? And he explained that it's when you move cross laterally. So it's like when you move your left leg and your right arm. And I got down on my 4s, and no matter how slow I tried, I could not do it.
Okay, so is that a sort of movement pattern diagnostic for dyslexia? I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, and I wasn't either at the time, but see, all babies start out moving unilaterally, like right arm, right leg. And then at some point in the development, they go cross-lateral, and that cross-lateral ability is a setup for skills like reading.
Okay, interesting. I normally see it the other way. I'm trying to teach people this more primitive homolateral movement. and which is, in Aikido, for example, but people are so used to the normal cross-lateral walking pattern, they can't always do it.
I wasn't aware of that, but yeah, and I think as a culture, we tend to have dyspraxia, and then, and this, as we know, this disconnection. But I certainly had it, and then, once I realized I had it, I just went on a quest to heal it, and I started healing that, and then I realized I had Asperger's, or now it would be, on the spectrum of autism, and I went on a quest to heal that, and then I realized I had Lyme, and I realized the impact that had on my body, and so I became a master at how we, as humans, particularly as men, could be disconnected.
Okay, so it's interesting you talk about healing these conditions, because I don't normally, people normally say they're permanent, that's it. But what I'm hearing is through some of the somatic work you were doing, there was a big improvement in that.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of BS, that these things aren't healable. It was somatic work, that was a huge part of it. It was nutrition, it was some energetic work, some emotional work. And then after a while, it just sort of had its own momentum, and it was, healing itself. And then what I realized, because of that disconnection, I had sort of jumped over a lot of my maturation, a lot of my growing up. As my body started to connect, I started going through experiences that taught me things I never got to learn because I wasn't there to learn them.
Right. I think as embodiment teachers, it's really worth being aware there's some people who have more of this disconnect, maybe not through trauma, but just through, I've got a couple of cousins that are on the spectrum, and one is kind of profoundly sort of clumsy, and the other one is kind of socially unskilled, and both have a bit of both. And they just seem to have always been that way. And there's a way in which they're slightly outside of their bodies in a way that is no fault of their own.
No fault of their own. And, medicine or the experts will say, all we can do is develop ways to cope with it. And, it's not curable. And I find that it is curable. And everything from, there's a big link with autism, and I certainly think Asperger's, with diet and the gut. But in all these cases, what I've seen with myself and other clients I've had over the years is their bodies are very tense. And I think it's a function of two things. I think it's function of the actual condition, and then it's a function of years of stress and in some ways almost trauma, dealing with having this connection or disconnection or these issues, and being such an outsider.
Right. So there's this piece of some autistic spectrum people, as I understand it, feel overwhelmed because they're just getting so much sensory input. And then on top of that, they might not understand some of the sort of social rules, or, this very complex implicit social communication that's going on, which is a big part of being a human being in the world, which I think would be quite stressful to not get that.
It's very stressful, and I know you're familiar with Stephen Porges and his work with vagal tone, and in how he discovered the front or the dorsal or the ventral part of the vagus nerve is really the newer part of the vagus nerve that really deals with that social connection, and that's how you heal a lot of trauma. But if you have Asperger's, which I think is connected to trauma so often, it's like that circuit is not connected.
Right. So people just not getting that social soothing. In fact, it's socially stressful, I imagine.
Exactly. And it goes the other way. It just becomes more stressful.
Got it. Well, thank you for bringing a bit of this in. This is, stuff I don't know much about, and it's a pretty big section of the population, so good to learn about. Let's talk about the men's work then. So you're doing this body work, you're on this healing journey yourself, you're learning some of these skills that maybe weren't so developed up to that point. Where did men's work come into that?
About 25 years ago, I'd healed a lot of this, and, I was feeling better and things were working better, but I realized that I still had this huge gap in my relationships, particularly with women. I think I mentioned on a TEDx talk that, I had a woman I was seeing, and she kept on saying it in this one conversation, "Owen, I can't feel you." And I started not arguing with her, but sort of debating with her, trying to argue a position and convince her that I understood what that meant, and I was able to connect feelings and all this. And finally, I credit her with some of this because she was so patient. I got what she meant. And I heard myself not connecting to my feelings, but connecting to the logic or the argument that I had feelings. And that set me on this quest of, oh, shit, I need to learn how to feel and express and then, really connect.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw that or felt that I had this huge resistance to doing it with men. And I saw that was a sign, found a way to help started a men's group when I had this holistic medical clinic in Scottsdale, Arizona, and started my first group then, and one thing led to another. And then 15 years ago, I redesigned the model of men's groups and how we work with men, and brought in a lot of this embodiment, because it hasn't been there in the realm of men's work, men's groups, and even working with people in general. And I said, that's a big missing piece, and we need to bring it in. And so I integrated it in with everything else I knew.
Let me jump in there if I may, because I think for some listeners, some of this is going to be pretty new. And, we're going to need to take a step back here a little bit. So, I mean, the idea of men's work and men's groups hasn't penetrated that far into the UK. And I know some of the countries that listen to this is almost unheard of as an idea. Now, I know maybe in the States, different places there, it's going to be, better known. Maybe we should start with this question, like, what is men's work, and why on earth would any man need to be in a group with other men?
Well, we're really starting to call it human work rather than men's work for a few reasons, because there's a certain association or disassociation with it. And we're working with giving men the skills that they never got for a few different reasons. And once they get these skills, because they're so instinctual, they become generative. They become, not only sustainable, but start to grow. And the key skills that I think we're missing as men, and at least the Western culture, is this ability to connect to our own experience, connect to our bodies and our emotions, which is really our experience, and with that, connect to others in a way that propagates safety and natural connection. And what I found, and now we're finding with every man, is that for men, we're more, we'll say, disconnected than the average woman. And when we sit together in these groups or trainings, just with men feel really safe, safer than they ever would expect. And safety is a key ingredient to being able to connect to your own experience, but also connect to others. And when men are just with men, they feel safer, and they get to screw up emotionally, because I know in this country, men feel emotionally inhibited in the sense that we're so used to, particularly with this Me Too thing, around women of doing the wrong thing emotionally.
Yeah. There's lots opening up here, so I want to kind of slow it down a little bit and take it apart. So, okay, first of all, the key skills people are missing, and particularly men, essentially you're talking about emotional intelligence skills, right? That's how you frame some of this, how to connect to ourselves, how to connect to others, how to express ourselves, this kind of thing.
Right, and we call it emotional physiology.
Emotional physiology, okay. And I mean, would you say that's different for men or for women? I've heard you talk about kind of men's emotional literacy and other talks. I mean, is it the same basic skills of sort of self-awareness and empathy and, this kind of thing? Or would you say there's actually emotional intelligence for men is actually a different thing?
Both. Over several years ago, I dove into that, and I created or saw 5 unique skills that are more dominant or more critical for men. And I called them the MQ skills, like IQ or EQ. And for example, one of the ones that I find most powerful is what I call emotional assertiveness, the ability to be open as a man, which we know is a key to connection, and women want that from us, and as guys, we often don't know how to do that. And it's also what might seem like counter ability to be assertive, to stand up and own your experience, own your space, and to be able to do that while you're still open and vulnerable. And that's a key skill for men. And when men get that, when men can be open but not collapse, and stand up and not be rigid, people just naturally start connecting with us.
Great. as I understand it, a sort of key framing in a lot of men's work is originally men were around children a lot more. So there would be children, in the fields with them, or, hunter-gatherer tribes. Certainly men would maybe go away for a bit, but they'd spend quite a lot of time around young boys and initiate those boys and teach those boys the way of the tribe. And then with industrialization, that happened less and less. The men were away, and the boys were essentially raised by women. And even, in the modern world, the vast majority of primary school teachers, for example, are women. And what I see when I'm at any kind of social public event, like a wedding or a party, is like little boys being drawn towards me and other men that have certain qualities, because it's like they're hungry for this thing that they're not getting enough of. Does that make sense?
More than sense. I fully agree. And the research shows that boys actually start out, and they are for the first couple of years, more sensitive than girls.
More sensitive? Sorry, what does that mean?
Well, they're more emotionally sensitive than girls at a comparable age. But what happens is that because of the social environment that you're talking about, we learn to shut down our emotional sensitivity, and in sync with that, we shut down our body awareness and our embodiment of our body and our emotions.
So there's a sort of traditional narrative that men are less sensitive, men are less emotionally expressive than women. And obviously we're talking in generalities, which a lot of people don't like now. And then I'm hearing something slightly different from you here, but I'm also hearing you do see that there is a difference in the emotional skill sets that are both natural and necessary for men and women.
Yeah, I think there's a difference. And, like this assertive vulnerability, women have it and probably more likely need it in the workplace than they ever have. The real point is that, men haven't had a place, or like as you said, the mentors to really develop these skills. And I think these skills are instinctual skills, but we still need a safe place to develop these skills where we feel confident in them and where they really, work for us and others.
What do you mean a safe place? It's not really a term I like, if I'm honest, Owen. I'm not sure I want to be in safe places. Like you mean a place that's just basically respectful, where there's not huge consequences if people fuck up?
Emotionally safe space. And we see and we hear from these men in the trainings or these groups is that once they're in this space, it might even be for 5 minutes or for 5 weeks of a group, they reveal that, wow, I've never felt so safe to take an emotional risk. I remember a couple of years ago, we had an attorney that joined one of our groups, and often the first night of a group, we had that guy check in last. In other words, he speaks last. So we go around the whole group. Everyone else does a minute or so of just saying where they're at emotionally and what's happening in their life, and expressing their feelings. And this fella says at the end, he says, in the beginning, before you all started, and I'm sitting here and I'm really scared. I'm shaking. I'm so scared. And by the time we got done, you guys got done speaking, it was my turn. I couldn't wait to speak because I felt not only safe, but I just felt here's an opportunity to feel and to express in ways I've never felt before.
Yeah, so it's somewhere where people can feel and express without risk.
Exactly.
I mean, this kind of weird modern obsession with safety. I mean, no one talked about feeling safe in the UK until about 3 years ago. It wasn't in the feeling list that we had. And this obsession with safety, I find a bit odd. I'm not sure I want to be in an emotionally safe place. I want to be in a place where there's difficult emotions and challenge, and like the idea of sort of an emotionally safe place to me doesn't sound particularly great unless.
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, unless you're talking about just basically somewhere that there's some sort of respect between people. There's, I don't know.
Yeah.
Still don't quite.
Yeah, I think we have different definitions.
Yeah.
So it's where there's no shame for these men to take risks.
Okay, well that I can understand. I mean,
but at the same time, we will challenge men, and they ask and they want to be challenged.
Yeah. So maybe it's a different definition the sort of college students are using as a place where I won't be challenged and I won't be upset. That's
no. I agree with you. I don't like those spaces either.
Yeah, okay. It seems A, impossible, and B, not desirable for building resilience to me. But
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So that clarifies things. Thank you. So in terms of a men's group, then I've only been in one once, and I know there's different kinds. Like paint a picture of how does this work. So there's maybe is it someone's house, a community center, like literally from the beginning, how might that work? Is it mostly talking? You said the body's involved. What would that look like to someone that's can't even imagine what a men's group is? Because I think most of us can't still.
Yeah, it could be any place. Often it's in someone's living room. In some cities where space is more limited, we often rent an office, like a space where guys can just sit. That's basically it. Some place that they can sit, hopefully somewhat comfortably, for a few hours once a week. And what we will often do at the beginning of the men's group, the evening, is we'll do a somatic meditation, just to mindfulness somatic meditation, just to get guys in their bodies, slowing down, which is another key thing that we work with, is slowing us down. And then we do what we call 4 rounds. And the first round is like a quick check-in. So it's, what do you feel in your body and in your emotions? So that's maybe 30 seconds. That just go around the room, the group, real quickly, just to get guys, in the room, feeling and connected. And then we do the second round where guys start talking about what's happening in their life in that week. And that's where the work starts. And then the third round is maybe one guy really chooses to work. And we have different processes, and a lot of them have a huge somatic aspect to them. And then the fourth round is sort of the opposite of the first round. It's a quick checkout round just to complete the meeting.
So you're building some of those kind of core competencies, like the nuts and bolts of, emotional awareness, somatic awareness. I imagine some sort of, some self-regulation skills in there. And then it sounds like a lot of it is like a 12-step group or something, like space to talk, space to listen.
There is, and we have a set of agreements. Like we don't get into our stories. It's not about stories, and you're not trying to fix a guy. And one of the core tenets of our work is you take the man deeper into his own experience. And certainly my belief is that if you go, Mark, deeper into your own experience, somatic and emotional, you will connect to things you were disconnected from. In the process of getting reconnected, you actually heal, fix, learn, or whatever for yourself.
Nice. I heard you talk about this in another podcast. It made a lot of sense to me that rather than kind of advice giving or endless fucking, going around the story over and over again, constantly analyzing ourselves, like actually just taking people into their own experience a little bit, helping them sit with that, providing an environment where that feels like, an okay thing to do. People deepen in their own experience and go, oh, okay. And then they've got an insight. Is that a kind of right understanding?
Right on. And then also what they get is after they do it a few times, maybe 100 times, it starts to be an automatic process. Rather than the automatic process of checking out, they're checking back in with their own experience.
So that's a muscle they build. So then when they're sitting there with their boss or their wife or whoever, they've built that muscle already in environments where it's a bit more consequential. They've built that environment in a place that is supportive in that way so that it's available. And then they're like, you know what, actually, I don't feel good about this. I want to tell my boss this is not okay, or express myself to my wife or whatever it is.
Beautiful. Yeah, exactly. So there's a joke in our group that the best night for connection or sex for these guys is the night of the men's group, because these guys come home without any real effort. They're beaming, they're embodied, they're connected, and the wife feels this huge attraction, or the girlfriend or whoever feels this huge attraction to them.
Well, I've noticed this as well with guys just generally. Like if I spend time with other guys in what I'd call masculine environments, whether that be, sitting and talking or martial arts or whatever, there's a kind of charge that gets built. I reconnect to myself. I let go of that neediness that can come from not having that. And there's a kind of just a general charge that gets built up. And then, I'd always find at university, I'd always do Aikido, which was mostly men. And if I went to a nightclub afterwards, I'd often find myself getting lucky on Aikido nights, because there was something, like I was self-connected, I was self-reliant, I was like, hey, I don't need this, but it's great if it happens, I was physically well as well, obviously, and I've been around a lot of guys, and then it was very easy to meet women on those nights. I distinctly remember that at university.
You got it. Yeah, we're not doing Aikido, but it's more like emotional Aikido, and it essentially has the same benefit.
And tell me a bit more about the somatic meditation. Stephen said this was something I should ask you about because he said it was, juicy.
It comes out of my training and Dan Doty's training in mindfulness and somatic meditation. And one of the businesses I used to have was a mindfulness stress reduction company in Phoenix. And I saw the huge benefit of mindfulness. But I also saw with a lot of mindfulness, the body was being left out.
Mm.
And so what we're doing is, again, slowing down, connecting to the body more than just the breath. So we have different ways to what we would call, or others would call it, do a body scan, where we're slowly taking the person or the group through their body. And in the process of that, they slow down, but their physiology slows down. They go from that sympathetic dominance to a parasympathetic or relaxed state, and they literally start to open up, and they start to feel parts of the body they haven't felt. And one of the benefits is it might take 10 minutes, we'll say, to do that, but that 10 minutes in a group is a huge investment, because by the time we're done with that little meditation, these men are much more present in their body, sort of like what you were saying, with your keto experience. Mm-hmm. And that greatly facilitates the whole meeting.
Yeah, I find that even just business meetings I do, if we do a little somatic meditation first, even just a very brief one, things are so much more constructive when people self-connect. And as you say, I think it's partly maybe because of the English word that's been translated as mindfulness. It sounds very mental, and there can be this being aware of the body as other rather than being aware as a body. And that distinction is quite subtle, but I think really important in meditation.
You really nailed it, because I see with a lot of meditators, even mindfulness people, they're become more aware of it, but they're not necessarily experiencing it. And as you know, experiencing it sometimes can be uncomfortable.
Yeah, not sitting there at a distance, being removed and detached from it, which sounds like the opposite of what you want to do in these men's group of getting people closer and deeper to their experience.
Yeah, and as you inferred earlier, sometimes it can feel unsafe. I mean, the room might emotionally be very safe, but that man might feel very unsafe because he's feeling things in his body he's never felt before. And one of the key reasons we do a lot of this stuff with our bodies is that we'll get guys, and I was one of them, you ask them, what do you feel? And they go, nothing. They roll their eyes. They don't have any emotional feeling. And so we come in the back door by slowing them down, getting them to feel their body. So we might spend a couple minutes asking them questions about their body, because we might see their body responding, and we make them aware of their body response. And then we ask them an emotional question, and inevitably they're able to answer that emotional question.
Yeah, it makes sense to me because the body is less subtle. It's for me, the body is kind of grosser, easier to connect with. If you poke someone in the leg, most people will feel that, or if, even noticing their own breathing. Whereas for me, what we call emotion is a sort of gestalt of subtle body sensations that have an emergent quality. And that's not immediately obvious to me, even as someone that's been working with this for 20 years, especially to do quickly when someone just says, hey, how are you? And, it's easy to say fine, right? Whereas to actually to take a moment, just saw my friend for lunch. I said, how are you? He said, I'm good. I'm like, what kind of good? He's like, oh, you're actually asking me? Okay. And he laughs and he checks in with himself. And, we speak for a few minutes. But that's not a normal thing for guys to do, I'd say.
It isn't. And that's why we do, this sort of check-in. And I live in a small town, so it's often we run into each other. And when we ask those questions, it's like we're doing a mini check-in. And so, we do it, but you're right. In a normal setting, it's pretty superficial, and there's not the space or opportunity to really connect to these deeper experiences.
Quick interruption to tell you about my book, Embodiment. Creatively named, hey? Actually, Embodiment, Moving Beyond Mindfulness. You can find this online at theembodimentbook.com. theembodimentbook.com. That's theembodimentbook.com. So this book is an introduction to the whole field. If you like these interviews, you'll probably love this book. Funny stuff, poems, personal stories from my life, illustrating what embodiment's all about, and loads for professionals in the field too. Top teaching tips, language tips, that kind of thing. Yeah, a real condensation of everything I've learned about embodiment, basically. So you can get pre-orders at Amazon.com, and if you just put in Embodiment Moving Beyond Mindfulness, that's the name of the book, or go to theembodimentbook.com. On there, you'll see quotes from various teachers, a bunch of fun illustrations, and you can also get the first chapter completely free online at theembodimentbook.com. Enjoy, and back to the interview. So you're doing this in a small town in Idaho. So for those that don't know, Idaho, as I understand it, it's kind of one of the square states, pretty Republican, pretty rural. Tell me if this is painting the right picture. It's probably pretty close to where I grew up in East Anglia in England in some ways. I mean, do people sort of say, what is this Northern Californian Boulder stuff that you're doing? Or is it just proves itself its worth?
I think they said that in the beginning 15 years ago. But in the 15 years, we have 4 groups. We probably had over 300 guys go through our groups. We had a documentary film on us, and the community really supports us. And it's not new age. It's really here. It's just become a natural thing. We have professionals, therapists, doctors sending us people. We've become an institution in this conservative, semi-conservative town. This town is not as conservative as the state of Idaho, which is very conservative. And we get every kind of guy, every kind of religion, from Mormon to Buddhist to Jewish to Christian to a lot of non-religious people, to different ages, to different professions. We're just guys, and the community sees that.
Yeah, and they say if people are getting benefits, if they're, going home and having better sex with their wife, or having better conversations with their boss, or being able to ask for a pay rise, or, real benefits like that, which is the kind of stuff I see coming out of somatic work generally, then people quickly lose the cynicism they might have. Is that fair to say?
I fully agree. And I think the thing with the somatic work is that there's not a lot of talk and theory. It's just work. So and it works. And we don't, in the basic events we do at Every Man and the groups, we don't teach. We just experience.
Right, got it. So I think there's a nice analogy there for guys. It's like, I say, look, this is like going to the gym. I went to the gym this morning. You do the reps, you build the muscle, and there's an analogy of practice and of just physicality and just doing it. It ties into that thing of guys like to do. And when things are activity based rather than, just being given advice or whatever, then there's a accessibility there.
Yeah, and you're right, because guys, we like to do things. And one of the things I notice with guys is that we experience and process a lot of our emotions through our bodies. And so a woman can, and I'm really generalizing here, I realize, but a woman can sit there and cry and, and feel stuff. And not that a guy can't, but it's a lot easier for guys to do it through their bodies. And so we've developed particular processes that really utilize the body to help men connect to and express and release their emotions.
Great. I mean, you've been doing this a while, and while this may be a new idea to a lot of listeners or a new reality, they might not have been to one, even if they've heard of them. There's been a couple of documentaries, that have come out, so maybe it's time has come. But what have you seen works well and what doesn't work well in men's groups over the years you've been involved?
Yeah, I think, there's men's groups started out as just like an intellectual discussion around being a man and, getting at least an intellectual validity to it. And then the next sort of generation was, all right, guys, we have emotions, and having emotions are okay. But it often became sort of prescriptive, which it worked, but there was a limit to that. And I think what we're seeing with what we do with men is that it's the next generation where it's not prescriptive. We're just giving guys experiences and some key principles and skills that they can use in their own way to develop themselves at their own pace, so that they are more successful in life.
Yeah. And any sort of mistakes or things that have been sort of dropped over the years that you think, okay, this is definitely, I know you help people start men's groups, you have resources for that. As the things that you say, look, don't do this, like don't give advice or whatever.
Yeah, don't give advice. Don't go into your story, because we like to do that. And there's always a guy or two in any group that's very good at telling a story. And then he puts us into trance. It's entertaining, but then you start to realize it's a story he's told himself and others many times, and he's really not connecting to what's really happening. Mm-hmm. And another thing that I see, and I also work with couples. My partner's a couples therapist, so we do couples trainings. And I go around, in the training and help these couples, which usually means I'm helping the guy. And what I'm doing in most cases there is I'm getting him to really not just feel and connect to his emotions, but to be able to communicate with his emotions. So as men, we think that we're communicating emotionally, and we really aren't. And often what we're doing is giving advice, fixing, and judgments. And so one of the things that we work with our guys is we keep it really simple. We say, we're going to start with this 5 emotions, and the 3 key ones are fear, anger, and sadness, and then shame and joy. And those first 3, as you know, are tied into the body and tied into survival. And when we can communicate from those places, and which means you're connected to those emotions, people really get us. So it takes some work to get guys using language that they think is emotional that really isn't.
Yeah. And part of me is wondering about how cross-cultural this is, in that North American culture seems to be quite expressive, tends to be quite confessional. There's this almost performative quality to it. Often when I listen to American teachers, they sound like they're giving a sales pitch, or there's a performance in some way. It's very public facing. Whereas, say, I can't imagine a men's group in Finland, for example, being this orientated towards sharing or feelings in such a way. So is there a potential criticism here that it's, quite a North American flavor to this?
I'm sure there is, and I would probably say there's some validity to it. And we're trying to not make it the normal performance thing. And again, just slow guys down and just get them to connect in their own way. And we have interest from literally all over the world to do our groups, because men are realizing, like I did, that there's a disconnection with themselves, and with other men, and then sort of scratching their head and going, oh, maybe if I sat with other men together, we could, figure this out.
It's interesting, because I think the time has come for this in my own life, but also just lots of guys I hear now are getting the idea of the wanting to be around men. I think men are tired of being demonized. Like every advert on British TV makes men look like idiots. I was looking at one of the new Star Wars films, and every male character in it is incompetent or dishonest or unpleasant. There's a way in which men are being demonized in a new way. Like this victim triangle has developed where men are always the persecutors. And men see the use of getting together on their own in a place where that isn't present.
Exactly. And, with that drama triangle, you're talking about being the persecutor. And then, if we're not the persecutor, and then we're the rescuer.
Right.
And that doesn't work either. And that's one of the things we work with the guys is don't rescue the guy. Let him have his own experience. Take him deeper, and he will get there, and you can be supportive, but don't do it for him. And that's that emotional safety that guys need, this base to have what we call like the emotional CrossFit gym, where they can go and do this emotional work.
Yeah, that's nice. Emotional CrossFit. I can see. I was years ago looking at what would a dojo be like for social skills. I have some social skills that are very developed, and others that took me a while to develop. And it's like I see guys looking at pickup. I see guys looking at circling. There's all these different places where they're trying to learn certain social skills, and emotional social skills particularly. And maybe it's easier to learn those with all guys rather than being shamed by a woman, risking some of the things that have become much more prevalent. It seems like the cost-benefit analysis of flirting, for example, has really changed in the last few years.
I think it has. And we do occasionally bring women into our groups, and we do things with women. We have different like introductory programs that we do with men and women. And we're going into some tech companies working with men, and what we've set up is where there's a whole group that works with women, and there's a group that work with men, and both sexes get to develop in their own venue and safe way these skills that maybe they wouldn't in a co-ed environment. And then they come back together, in a way that they weren't able to initially.
Because there's different biases between those groups, even though it's generalities, there may be certain skills that are better developed in the men and in women. And I mean, I remember once I became aware of just how massively more social. I used to work with kids, and at a certain age, the boys are just absolutely eclipsed in terms of their emotional and social skills by the girls. And both in a good way, like I see women working, these young girls working really skillfully to support each other and encourage each other, but also in terms of bullying, as well. Much more sophisticated social bullying from the girls is what I'd see. And at a certain point, I went, wow, the men are really bringing a knife to a gunfight when it comes to these kind of emotional intelligence skills.
Yeah, that's a good metaphor. And it really is. And I know in this country, and I think it's sort of throughout the West, that women are eclipsing men in terms of school, graduate school, professional development, and guys are being left behind, which is one of the reasons these corporations are calling us and saying, we need to teach these men these emotional skills so that they can survive, let alone succeed in this changing world.
Yeah, boys are doing very badly in the British educational system right up to university level now. Way worse than the girls. And also there's a sort of, I'm working in management training quite a lot, and there's a movement towards a kind of management style quite strongly and also legally, which could be described as a feminine management style. And for the sort of some of the dinosaur managers, that's kind of a shock.
It is, and that's another reason that we're brought in. You probably go in so that we help that transition, and so these guys, the old dinosaurs, don't screw up and cause problems for themselves and the corporation, because I know in this country they're getting sued. The corporations are getting sued because of a bad player.
Yeah. The guys getting fired for things they don't even understand. They don't even know how to root up, and they're getting fired, and the corporation's getting sued. So there's big money involved. There's definitely a push for that, and changes in HR law, meaning things are more sort of subjectively and emotionally defined in the UK as well. Like if someone says they're being bullied, the standard for that now is they feel bullied, which I think is completely ridiculous, but it changes the playing field quite a lot.
Well, it does, and as you're saying, guys are just even more confused. They were confused anyway, but it's like the walls of their box is closing in on them, and the antithesis of that, or these groups where none of that shows up. It's not a professional environment, and there aren't women there. And like I say to these guys, you don't sleep with these guys, you don't work with them. And they're just random guys that you sit with on a regular basis, and you get to be yourself with.
I mean, things have changed, and in some ways, in some very good ways. So I don't want to sound like there's not a lot of good that's come from men being challenged on certain kind of male behaviors. But when I see the Gillette ad, when I see some of the movies coming out of Hollywood, it just seems that this is very anti-male vibe. And it's not a leveling of the playing field, because that's what people will often say. Hey, when you lose your privilege, it looks like discrimination. No. It seems like there's an anti-male vibe just in the zeitgeist at the moment.
I think there is, and I'm seeing and hearing from women, some progressive women, more and more, that it's gone a little too far. And they're saying it because women are being negatively impacted. One of the stats is that a lot of these younger men don't want to get married.
No, there's too much risk in that. Why would you do that? Like, given the sort of setup of things in divorce courts, why would you do that? It's
exactly. And then you add in the whole thing about the digital, the virtual, the whatever, and guys are not connecting one-to-one, because I learned even with my Asperger's and dyslexia through high school, particularly, dating girls, I learned a lot, and I learned a lot screwing up, and I could screw up because there wasn't any real serious consequences if I made a little mistake.
Yeah.
And it was live, it was personal, it was interactive, it wasn't digital. So you bring that factor into it, and we get these younger men in our trainings and groups, and they really are behind the learning curve, and they're in a good way forced to develop these natural human skills of looking some person in their face and speaking to them.
I wonder, because the digital age, if some of those social skills are less developed in the face-to-face context, and also because, as you say, the differences in consequences that can exist for getting some of those things wrong or being clumsy in those domains. I've certainly seen that. It doesn't seem like there's much room for learning in there now.
I don't think there is, and I just read a stat that the average guy touches his phone over 2,000 times a day.
Wow. Yeah.
So how many times does he get in touch with his own body or his own emotions in a day?
Okay. Well, in terms of, we sort of painted something of a bleak picture there, but I see its positive side, that also men are realizing there's a need for this. People taking men's stuff kind of seriously now. I do see that what was considered a bit weird or a bit unnecessary is now being more widely accepted. I think it's wonderful what you've done. It seems like you've made a template for men's groups available. So showing people online like how to do that, so people can start their own groups. Is that right?
Yeah, we are developing, and it should be released soon, a whole, the beginning of the tech for that. But right now, men can, get our free protocol, which is something I designed or created a few years ago, for a guy to start a group. It's a 12-week protocol, and it just walks that man or men are starting a group, and really the whole group, through, a set of lessons and principles and really skill development. So at the end of 3 months, if they've really gone through that, you really got a tight group, and you got the basic skills to evolve the group from.
So talking about sort of virtual stuff, I mean, can these be done virtually, or do they have to be face-to-face?
I think they're more powerful, for certainly face-to-face. We've experimented with some virtual. It was more successful than I thought it would be. And what really happened was that these guys got to feel connected with each other. And so I'm running what we call the foundation training, which is the beginning of a certification program. It's a 7-month program. And part of that training is we got guys all over North America. They're in it, and a lot of it is virtual. And so these are more trained guys, but we're certainly seeing that the virtual part really helps these guys. When in their what we call triads, the 3 guys that they meet once a week, and then virtually, as a large group.
Yeah, we've certainly found with training, people find it difficult to commit to large amounts of time, and virtual can help prep that. And I've also been, as people get more used to the online context, I think groups go deeper. In that, from 10 years ago, I saw the sort of clunky Skype calls and things, and people found it difficult. Now I see people getting more and more used to it, and I've been surprised by the depth that groups on Zoom will go to, for example.
Yeah, I think, Zoom is a platform that we also use, and we have guys crying and being emotional and vulnerable, on these calls. In part because they already know the guys and they have some skills, but it becomes a virtual group, and in that way, it does work. And I think for sure it's better than no group or no connection.
Yeah, I think a lot of people I know travel quite a lot, like myself. We're on the road quite a lot, or there's one men's group in Brighton I thought about joining, and it was like you had to be there was a commitment to sort of 6 of 8 sessions, for example, and something you had to be there at like 80% of the sessions or something. And I just went, I can't with my travel schedule. That just became impossible.
When we have, and I'm now one of them, travel a lot because of all the teaching I do. But I'm still a member of a local group. And what we found is once you've sort of been a member of the group, you've got the skills, that you come in and out from your travels, and it works. It's harder to work in the beginning when you don't have that connection and skill base to go in and out of. But so, yeah, down the road, we're looking at developing a program for men like that. In fact, we got clients. I have clients in England, and we had another fella fly out for a last training from England to do our trainings in California. His wife bought him the training.
It's interesting how women will become quite supportive of men's work once they see the impact it has. Like I've had
they're our biggest supporters.
Yeah, they'll be like, I've had girlfriends be like, go to Aikido, Mark, or go to AA, Mark. Like once they see that it impacts them positively and you positively, they're kicking you out the door for it. And have you had any pushback, Owen, from sort of any groups, or is the trans issue, for example, come up for you? Has there been any pushback from feminist groups? What do you find in this modern context? Is there any challenge here?
I haven't. I'm sure we have. I haven't heard it. Like I just said, more and more I get women championing this. When I'm traveling or whatever, and they go, "What do you do?" And I say that to a woman, she's jumping up and down. It's either I want to send you my son, I want to send you my boyfriend, I want to send you my husband, and so I think on a whole, women are real supportive. Society's becoming more supportive. I do find that there's a certain I'm going to call it academic approach to this whole phenomena of the feminine and the masculine. And we stay away from those words for a few reasons. And there might be some pushback in that realm, but in the general society, no. And we have guys of every kind of diversity you can think of in our trainings and groups. And we're trying to get more diversity because, as a company, we were all white guys that started this, but we really go for it, and we are very inclusive.
Okay. What you remind me there of one thing is one of the things I really love about women is they often care about us men more than we care for ourselves. Often, for example, I'll put a post up around, I'm long-term sober, and I'll put a post up about that. And I won't get responses from men. I'll get responses from women who are wanting their son or their husband or their brother to get help. And it seems like often as guys, and I heard you talk about this on another podcast, that we don't do these things that are good for us until we have to, until we're sort of cut to the bone. It seems like as men, we're often quite slow learners to look after ourselves in these kind of ways. Do you know what I mean?
I fully agree, and I want to change that. And I do see it changing with the younger men, the millennials and younger. They're more open, and they're less likely to come to this work or anything else, like my Rolfing, for example, little less likely in being in a critical crisis.
Yeah, the millennials often get a hard time, but I've definitely seen an increase in emotional intelligence that, from my grandfather's generation would have been unimaginable. And I feel like, I'm a step up from my dad's generation in this kind of way. And I do see an increase there. And if I'm honest, though, I also see just a lack of masculinity. I was walking today to lunch to meet my friend, and I walked by a young guy kind of leaning on a lamppost in skinny jeans, and it's by a kind of hipster coffee shop, which we have a lot of here. And he must have been late 20s, but it seemed kind of like a boy in some ways. It's a kind of archetypal hipster kind of thing that I see, and I feel more sad than anything else when I see that. It's like a lack of manliness there.
And I feel a certain sadness, and I want to go over and not so much shake him, but just say, look, it's okay to feel these things and find your own way to experience it. And so you don't have to be that macho asshole. I mean, there's a way to be masculine that really keeps your sensitivity.
I mean, that's what we're really looking for, isn't it? Like a third way. So not the macho idiot, not the new age wimp or the kind of hipster wimp, but some sort of third way here, isn't it? Like that's what I feel men are looking for. And also I hear women screaming for this. I heard, I just constantly hearing female friends saying, I want a boyfriend like this. Why can't I find a man like this? This one's too much of a jerk. This one's a complete, wimp. And it's like that third way is just being screamed for right now.
It is. And do you know Ester Perel? Yeah, she's a huge fan of ours. She's had me on her TV show. She's come to our more advanced training. And a brilliant woman, and it's for the people that don't know her. I mean, she speaks 9 languages and works in 9 languages, and
Wow.
has 2 TED Talks or over 10 million views, and her books are bestsellers. And she gets couples, she gets women, but she really gets men, and not just in a conceptual way, but she really cares about men. And she sees how men are hurting. So her next book, her next project is men. And that's one reason she's like studying with us and working with us, because she sees that we sort of get it dialed in, and that we work with men through their bodies and not just through their heads. And that, like so many women, she wants these men to find a way to be emotionally connected and powerful at the same time.
I definitely see on the leading edge a desire for healing between men and women. So there's a sort of a period of anger and renegotiation. I get that. I get the need for that. And then in some ways from both sides, I want, we have this hope that in the future we might look back on this kind of period of human history and say, do you remember the bad old days when men and women were at war before we had this healing and this kind of new way of being? That's my kind of hope for the men and the women involved in all this work.
Well, mine too. I mean, I think some have said, and I have said too, that when we can heal the war of the sexes, this unnecessary battle between men and women, or the feminine, the masculine, however you want to describe it, we might end all wars.
It's certainly related. And maybe say a little bit more as we move towards wrap up about some of your kind of vision for this, some of what you'd like to do before you die, basically.
I'd love to change that whole paradigm of what it is to be a man and really a human, but the man's part of being a human in this world, so that we can really develop this natural connection that I think we're hardwired to have, but we've been trained not to have, and trauma or stress has taken us away from that. So to de-traumatize, de-stress guys, get them back into their bodies, get them connected to their emotions, and out of that, learn the skills that they never got to learn, so they can connect to the people that they really care about, the ones that they love, and with that, really make a contribution in life. And that's another reason men come to us, because they want to make a contribution, and they realize it's hard to do that if you're disconnected. And take this eventually, into schools, and, excuse me, not in the way that we work with men, but in a comparable way for boys.
Nice. Okay, so if people are interested in men's group or your own work, Owen, where do they go? What do they check out?
They check out our company called Everyman, and it's the second E is missing, so it's EVRYMAN.com, and that site has all our information. And my partner Dan Doty is in London right now, doing a show with Channel 4. They're doing a whole program on toxic masculinity. So they wanted us, or Dan, to come out and work with a group, and you really show them what we're doing to shift that.
Beautiful. It seems like you're really getting out there. I mean, on the website, there's links to Men's Health, New York Times. Is that the Joe Rogan show? Were you on the Joe Rogan show?
Yeah, Dan Doty was on the Joe Rogan show, and we're actually sort of holding back on some media because we've had so much interest in our work, our groups, that we got to get our technology caught up so that we can really serve the men in the way that we want to serve them.
Well, Owen, very cool. I've been looking at your website at Owen Marcus with a C, marcus.com as well.
Well, thank you, Mark.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Do you have a final message about the body for listeners?
Yeah, slow down. I think we can't really feel our bodies until we slow down. And when we slow down, we leave that sympathetic or fight or flight state, and we start to slow down and connect to that more parasympathetic state, which allows us to, feel our bodies, feel our emotions, to express ourselves, and consequently connect with others.
Owen, thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
some ways to get more, to give back, and to get more involved now. So the biggest request I have would be to share the podcast with your friends, people that you think would really enjoy it. Email it to them, put it on your social media, tell them about it, old school. Really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support us financially, you can go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/embodiment podcast and give us $1 an episode. And I'd say they're well worth $1. So that's less than £1 if you're in UK-ish. So yeah, please go there. On the embodiedfacilitator.com website is where this is hosted. If most people I think listen to for iTunes. iTunes, we'd certainly appreciate a review. The way iTunes works means that a review means more people will find it. iTunes regards it as more important for searches. So even a couple of sentences review really does help as a little thank you to us. And if you want to go to embodiedfacilitator.com, you can see the actual, links to the sites. There's comments on there. The Facebook group tends to be where people discuss things. So if you go to put in the Embodiment podcast into Facebook, there's a page which is relatively quiet and a group which does have some discussion on. So I will reply to things personally there. So also on embodiedfacilitator.com website, there's all sorts of freebies there. There's videos, there's free ebooks, there's ebooks you can buy. And of course, there's our newsletter list. If you want to stay in touch and learn about things like the Embodied Facilitator course and our next Embodied Yoga Principles teacher training, then go to that website and you'll see a little pop-up and you can get the newsletter through there. Okay, so I think they're the main ones. Tell your friends, pay us some money on Patreon, give us a review on iTunes, send us your email if you want to be on the newsletter list, and get involved on the Facebook there. Bit long. Pick whatever you like that works for you. Until next time, welcome home to the body.